Rev up your engines! Today I'm going to talk about a very expensive SUV, a Wagon or Mercedes G Wagon. Now they've been making these things for a long time, since 1979. People used to import them to the United States from Germany because they didn't sell them here, but they have sold them here. And strangely enough, from 2013 to 2015, they actually made 69 pickup versions of the thing. Now they technically call them SUVs now, but Wagon really means terrain car. Hey, it's all-wheel drive. It's set to go through some serious terrain. Now, the original list price of the G550 was well over $100,000. They're expensive vehicles, there's no doubt in that. But look, you get the chrome spare tire cover. There it is. You want easy access to the back? Well, doesn't get much easier than this. You can climb right in. Like everything else, the seats fold back if you want. And this baby is tall. You got a lot of height in this thing. Now, the original G-Wagons were handmade by Magnus Steyr in Austria. And guess what? They still are. Now, it's got a big V8 engine. We take some of this plastic crap out of the way. Fully loaded one is over 6,600 pounds. This is over a 3-ton vehicle. With all this power and all this weight, the combined rating, 13 miles a gallon. You're lucky if you get 10 in one of these things in town. You do not buy these things for gas mileage. Now, this one was recently purchased used. The fourth owner of this vehicle. They come, they go. If we look at the odometer, got almost 148,000 miles on it. And it sold for less than 20% of its original list price, which is totally logical with any Mercedes, but especially with these. They don't sell that many of them, between 3,000 and 4,000 a year. The parts aren't cheap. So Mercedes are not cheap, and on a lower production model, they tend to be even more expensive. Now, this particular one, from what the new owner tells me, came from New York State. Doesn't surprise me. I can see the corrosion. Now, this is just superficial rust, but when we go further down, even the structural bolts, they're starting to show some rust on them. And we go to the other side. Hey, we can see the ABS system's got quite a bit of corrosion there, down here. And the lines coming off the brake master cylinder, you can see they're really getting corroded. That's why if you're buying a used G-Wagon or really any other car, it's a better idea to do the opposite of this vehicle. You don't want to buy a vehicle that started out in New York State and ended up in Texas. You would want to buy a vehicle that started out in Texas and then you imported it to New York State. That's a smarter move. But on the positive side of this whole thing, look, everything's still metal, even in 2012. There isn't a bunch of plastic crap. All these parts are made out of metal. The oil cooler, everything's made out of metal. It's not plastic. Even the oil filter that's hiding in here, that cap comes off. The cap is plastic on all the new cars. Not on this, it's still metal. The Austrians who put this thing together, hey, they did build a solid vehicle. There's no arguing that. And when we go underneath, this is one solid vehicle. You can see it doesn't have modern CV joints. It's got the old-fashioned ones made out of steel. These things are solid. And of course, when we go to the back side, the big solid rear end. These are hefty vehicles. They're not little toys. They are very solid built. But again, since I lived in New York State, check this out. Some of these components on the frame and stuff, hey, they're rotting away. They got some rust on them. That kind of amazes me about the Germans. Their anti-corrosion stuff, it isn't what it should be. My mother lives in Buffalo. She's got a Toyota Corolla. 6 years older than this. Doesn't have any of that rust on it. They actually did the rust proofing better than the Germans did. So if you're looking at a used German car, you really got to check for rust. Really, they just don't do the corrosion inhibitors, in the past at least. Companies like Toyota and Honda did, that don't have the rusting problem. And now comes the real test, the electronics test. Got the old scan tool hooked up. We're going to see what's really inside this thing. I think it'd be alphabetical, but it's not there. Mercedes is first. Figure that one out. We'll do a little diagnosis here. It's going to take a while because there's a lot of stuff that these things scan. As you can see, it's only 9% done now. Well, it's getting there. It's at 93%. So far, it's found a lot of codes. We're going to count them up when it's done. Lots of fault codes, so we're going to count them off. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45 separate trouble codes. Now, granted, some of them are related to each other, but this is typical when I get any of these German cars. When they get to be the age of this thing, they're going to have problems up the wazoo. Some of them you'll live with, and some of them you can't live with. I'm going to look at a few of the more serious ones here, such as the electronic transmission control. It's got a code for the voltage on the terminals low. CAN communication with other control modules is impossible, meaning there's a problem with either the wiring or the computer modules to the transmission. The electronic stabilization, which is a big deal, has problems. Signal is implausible or lost. Steering angle sensors is initialized. Now these are big, tall vehicles. They put all that stuff in them so they don't tip over. Well, this system obviously is not working right. It can cost a fortune to repair these things. You have to realize you're buying one of these old things. A lot of those systems aren't going to work correctly anymore. It has a problem with the signal activation module, and it's got all kinds of problems with the wiring for the beams. Realize on this thing, even the headlights are controlled by computers. These things just will drive you nuts if you want a perfect car. If you live in Texas like me, the automatic air conditioning has problems too, and that's a big deal here. So you have to realize, buying any used Mercedes is a big gamble to begin with. But one of these G Wagons, you are looking at an electronic rat's nest as they age. Just to take a perfect example, I showed you some corrosion on the vehicle. All that wiring has wiring connectors on it. You get a little bit of corrosion on any of those wires, it'll start giving weird feedback to the computer, and you can get a lot of codes like that. So if you want a vehicle that's perfectly operating, you would spend the same amount of money you pay for the car in order to fix all those things. But if you can live without that stuff, if it runs good enough, some people don't mind. Because these big V8s, they can keep rolling even when a lot of stuff isn't working for them. On an older one like this, on a newer ones, not so much, because everything is even more computer controlled. But this old thing still runs pretty good. I mean, it's a tremendous gas hog, there's no arguing that. But you gotta realize, before you buy one, a guy like me, hook up a fancy machine and give you the real skinny on the vehicle. Because odds are the previous owner even has no idea all the things that are going on with it. They can't hide it from the machine. So realize, if you're gonna buy a G-Wagon, especially a used one, you can't have it to impress people about how rich you are, because you'll probably be spending a bunch of your money fixing it if you keep it for years and put some serious mileage on them. These are not cheap to repair or maintain vehicles. But I do have to say, I saw one that was 3 years old in Houston the other day. Got it all fixed up. He was trying to sell it used for over $200,000. So I guess if you buy one for 30, you got a lot of wiggle room to put money into repairs. And here's some bonus questions and answers. Martin Lewis says, hey Scotty, greetings from Australia. What do you think of a Subaru Impreza WRX 1997 manual, 150,000 miles? That's the standard transmission, that's what you want. The automatics are garbage, but it's got a lot of miles on it. It could still be a decent vehicle. It's old, it's a 97, but if it still works pretty good, hey, don't pay much, but it could be a good vehicle. I know, from my friend in Australia, a lot of people like those things in Australia, especially with the standard transmission. So, don't pay too much, but it could be a fun car. But you do want to check out the engine. Have the head gasket checked. Put in a block leak test to see if it's leaking, because if the head gasket's leaking, I don't buy it. You have to rebuild the engine. John Brown says, what do you think about a Cadillac Escalade coming out in 2021? I've not been a fan of those things since they came out, because guess what? Scotty has to work on those things. I live in Houston, Texas, big city, big oil money, and there's a lot of guys driving around Cadillac Escalades. A lot of the rapper guys like driving around in them too. As they age, they become endless money pits, and they are also tremendous gas hogs. Don't believe any of the gas mileage ratings that you read. You drive those things in the city, you're going to get below 10 miles a gallon in them. That's just how those things are. They're big, they're heavy. I personally wouldn't buy one. You want a big, heavy thing like that? Go out and get a Toyota Sequoia or something, a Ford Expedition or something, but I wouldn't buy that Cadillac. Carvalho says, 2013 Hyundai Elantra, is it even worth looking at? Why not? You won't pay much for one. If you drive it, it rides smooth. The engine goes good. After your test, you look under the car. You don't see oil dripping down and water dripping down. Take it to a mechanic. If a mechanic says it's a decent vehicle, if you can get a good price, hey, I've had customers buy used ones. They had low enough mileage. I wouldn't touch one of those things at 120, 140,000 miles. You buy one, they generally will make it to 100, 120,000 without any real problems. Look at it. If a mechanic says, okay, if you can get it cheap enough, go ahead. The Ravishing Rabble Rouser says, should I buy 2020 Civic Si or Type R? Depends on how much money you want to spend, you know? Fast little cars get the Civic Type R. You're going to pay a whole bunch more money for it, but man, those things are screamers. Plus, they're going to hold their resale value because they're basically tiny race cars. So if you can afford it, it's going to keep its value up. Just make sure you keep insurance on it, because if it gets wrecked, you lose an awful lot of money. Get full coverage on it. Over time, will probably become collector's items of some sort, where the Civic Si won't. But on the other hand, the Civic Si costs a lot less. You're not going to get the speed and the handling, but it's a great little knock-around car for standard transportation. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.